Hello and welcome to the Rams Talk podcast. Today it's the first preview show ahead of the 2024-25 Championship season. Yeah, we're back in the Championship and the first away game is Blackburn Rovers away. I'm joined with Ian from the 4,000 Holes podcast. Ian, how are you?
Super, thank you. Yes, I've enjoyed a bit of sunshine today. As far as I'm concerned, it's still the cricket season. I don't know why we're messing about with this silly sport called football, but hey, what the hell?
Yeah, we've got to put ourselves through it for another 6 to 9 months now.
That's the spirit. This is what I like to hear.
You can't enjoy the summer much longer, the football's back. But no, obviously the first opening day of the season, the Friday night, feels like Derby always seems to be on TV the first game. I know for the few years in Championship we've been on it, and now Blackburn Rovers away. I remember the last time I went there when we were underway, obviously Blackburn won 3-1, I think, that game. But we'll talk about Blackburn Rovers now and sort of what was last season like for Blackburn. Obviously, I know you finished 19th. It was sort of a topsy-turvy season in terms of form here and there and stringing wins consecutively together. But talk to us now from almost explaining it through, obviously.
I think it was more turvy than topsy, I think, towards the end. A season of two halves, as perhaps the cliche would have it, where we were managed by John Dale Thomason at the beginning of the season, who wanted to carry on playing his brand of expansive, exciting football, exciting from the perspective of the opposition carve through us at will, because we hadn't really sussed out a defence. But we did play some really nice stuff, I have to say. And it became abundantly clear that Thomason had identified areas that we needed to improve and had made his feelings known, and he wasn't supported by the board. And I have to say, I was absolutely gutted when he left, because he brought something to the club that we haven't seen for years, in terms of like naked ambition about wanting to get back to the Premier League and demonstrating a method of playing that would achieve that, you felt, if he got the right players. But for whatever reason, the support wasn't forthcoming, and I think he just got fed up, and December was grim. I live in Sheffield, and I had to go and watch us sort of lose to a series of Yorkshire clubs, and it wasn't really nice going to Sheffield Wednesday, Huddersfield, Hull. And so you don't leave the house at the end of it. And it became abundantly clear that he had to go, and then we brought John Eustace in, and then it was the second half of the season, or slightly less than half of the season. It was a battle. It was a war of attrition to get just enough points to get us over the line. And we had the crazy situation where we had some appalling home performances, but beat Leeds at Ellen Road and beat Leicester at the Crisp Bowl, as I like to call it, on the last day of the season. I think we were lucky to get Leicester last day of the season, because that meant that they were perhaps their eye was off the ball, or they were hungover, depending on your perspective. But either way, we took advantage, and that gave us the points that we needed to stay up. And at one point on that last day, a single goal by Leicester City could have sent us down. The results were all going against us. Everyone was reassuring themselves that there needed to be a sequence of results. And there's no way those 6 results are all going to happen. And sure enough, at one point in the afternoon, it looked like they were. So that was scary. It wasn't nice. So glad to see the back of last season. I think basically it wasn't one of our finest moments in the Championship. And bearing in mind the year before, we'd been on the cusp of getting in the playoffs on the final day. It was quite the fall from grace. So yeah, bit. Say topsy-turvy is the phrase you use, but it definitely ended up turvy rather than topsy.
Yeah, I think I can definitely sympathise with you. I think when we've been in the Championship a few seasons back now, we've had them sort of seasons where, it sort of goes down in the second half and you feel like you're really up against it.
Yeah.
But obviously that was last season. You want to put that behind you. You want to hopefully be optimistic with this season coming. And in terms of this summer, this pre-season, what's it been like for Blackburn Rovers? Obviously, I know that you've still got Szmodics, the talisman, playing for Blackburn.
Well, yes and no. I think he's not really featured pre-season. They've left him out of the recent friendlies. The hot gossip is that Ipswich are in for him, but they won't pay what Rovers want. And that Szmodics is apparently reasonably settled in the Northwest, and he's looking to sign for Everton. So, but Everton are a bit of a financial basket case. I'm not sure that they could come up with the money in any event. I would be amazed if Szmodics is in the first team squad on Friday. from a perspective of if he gets injured and Rovers don't get the money for him, we will really be in the clag. The summer has been horrendous. So I need to paint a picture. This is a team that barely stayed up on the final day of the season. We saw our loan players go back to their parent clubs at the end of the season. And we have had, well, until 10 days ago, zero investment in the team. And we just saw players leaving and thinking, crikey, what on earth's going to happen here? Subsequent to that, we've signed an unknown centre-forward from Molenbeek in Belgium. We've signed a Japanese striker. We brought back Callum, who was here last season, who was a temporary stopgap. His 37-year-old legs sort of helped just to see us over the line, but we signed him for another season, largely because our centre-back, Scott Wharton, who is the brother of fledgling England star Adam, he's out for the season with a cruciate injury. So I think it made sense to keep, for continuity at least, to keep Callum in that back four. And we've signed Danny Bath, who was at the end of his contract from Norwich, a player who we tried to sign this time last year, but Venky's kiboshed it apparently because he was too old. So I don't know how they think time works, but he's a year older now than he was last year when he was too old for us to sign. So he's come in on a short-term deal as well to try and provide some experience. So we have some promising youngsters who aren't quite, shall we say, ready for the grim battle of a championship season, and we needed some experience. There's no doubt about that. But the massive unknown that we have is around who's going to score the goals. So if we assume that Szmodics isn't with us at the beginning of the season, which I think that's more realistic than him staying. We've also sold Sam Gallagher to Stoke. And if you look down the list of players who scored last season, I think out of the 60 league goals that we scored last year, players who scored 35 of them are no longer here. I say that includes Szmodics, obviously. So somebody, preferably more than one person, needs to step up to the plate, and that's what we are nervous about. So I went to the pre-season friendly at Stockport last Friday and saw Big Mac, our new centre-forward, as I say, who's coming from Belgium, make his debut. He looks a unit. He looks awkward, but we're playing a League One team, and we only scored from the penalty. So it's a pre-season friendly. Let's not get carried away. But the big question mark is, where are the goals going to come from? So right now, I think, Rovers fans are sort of saying, well, if we're going to win enough games to stay up, it's probably going to be 1-0ers. We're not going to be an expensive team in the manner of JDT. It's going to be pretty tough going. So it's been hard. I think we're still 3, maybe 4 players light of what you consider to be a solid championship squad. I think we need another goalkeeper. Arguably, we need another fullback. Arguably, we need another midfielder. But with the 2 lads coming in up front, hopefully that gives us enough cover. But if Szmodics is with us on the 1st of September and he's happy to stay and he's ready to play, that will be a massive, massive boost. But to expect him to chip in with 30 goals again next season, I think would be hugely optimistic. But realistically, if I was his agent, I'd be desperate to get him out of Blackburn Rovers right now, to be fair.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one where you can understand that he's contributed so much to last season's goal tally, but then he could command such a high fee that would warrant a bigger transfer budget. So it's one of them where it works.
Yeah, it's also trying to be fair to the player as well, because we had this situation with Bradley Dack a few years ago where he fired us out of League One back into the Championship, and he was on the crest of a wave, and West Bromwich Albion was supposedly in for him, and then he did his cruciate. And since then, yeah, he's I think he's a free agent now, isn't he? Sort of like spends more of his time on ITV reality shows with his wife than he does on a football pitch. So I think it's easy to see the risks that a player has. This is an opportunity for Szmodics probably to at least treble his wages. He's 28 going on 29. This is his last chance. He did everything for us last year. There's no Rovers fan would begrudge him his opportunity to move to the Premier League for sure. But the club desperately needs the money because we can't bring funds in from India. Our parents are kiboshed by an injunction over in India. So we have to generate funds in the UK, which is why we sold Adam Wharton in January and why Sammy Szmodics is being touted around now. So it's a difficult situation, and it's one that we could do with getting resolved quickly so we know where we stand before the window closes.
Yeah, and I think another signing that sparked my interest was Andreas Weimann, obviously coming into Blackburn Rovers, former Derby County player, and a player that I think
maybe performed better away from Derby in terms of output. I think he scored a couple more in the seasons when he was away at Bristol City.
Yeah.
And then obviously West Brom last season, if I'm correct. I think he's a player that I think has the talent to get in the positions and take the ball forward. But for Derby, he seemed to be hit and miss in terms of scoring goals. But I think he's a player that you think if he had the right service, whether he could end up hitting the back of the net a few more times than what he has done. He's not a 20-goal a season striker by any means. He sort of plays anywhere amongst the front three.
Yeah.
As a player, he's very quick. So, but he's definitely got some goal contributions in there. So maybe he could be the player to step up the plate and sort of fill that gap that's been.
Well, he definitely falls into that category of some experience, know-how that we're crying out for. I don't think anybody's expecting him to chip in with more than a handful of goals, to be perfectly honest. Bristol City supporters who've sort of like been on our forum sort of said, he's solid, he's dependable, he won't rip up any trees, but bear in mind he's 33. I don't know how much there is left in his legs, but for this season, he might solve a problem while some of our youngsters, and again, one of our promising young strikers, Harry Leonard, has picked up an injury, and he's going to be out in the early part of the season. So having somebody like him to cover that gap makes perfect sense in the short term. But our expectations are structured, as you rightly point out. He's not a 22, 23-year-old up-and-coming, likely to blossom. He's experienced, and we need that, but there's a lot of goals that we need to replace.
Yeah, I think I can understand that, and I think when I can sympathise with you when you said earlier that you need maybe 3 or 4 more signings to be a solid team. I feel like we're sort of in that position as well. I think a lot of clubs are after a goalkeeper. Like you mentioned, it seems that everybody needs a first-choice keeper, and there's not a lot readily available. I think we've currently got one, probably professional keeper, you would call it, and the rest are academy goalkeepers. And unfortunately, I think we've conceded something like 10 goals against lower league opposition in pre-season. So
there's nothing guaranteed to galvanise the supporters, is there? And getting tonked seriously repetitively pre-season.
I think. Yeah, we definitely need a goalkeeper to come in who I think is of that championship quality. I think in League One, we were fortunate to have Joe Hardsmith, who's obviously moved on to West Brom and won Golden Glove last season. It was a shame to see him leave, but we're kind of in the position now where we need a goalkeeper. We're linked heavily with one from Sweden, but it's all a bit up in the air in terms of his registration or something along those lines with playing in, I think, the Conference League. But in terms of looking to this season now, what are the expectations from Blackburn Rovers fans? Is it to stay up again, or is it to build up on last season? Where does it sort of lie with Blackburn Rovers fans?
Well, 10 days ago, I think 90% of Rovers fans would have said we're nailed on for relegation. The bringing in of 4 or 5 players of varying ages and pedigrees has at least sort of said, oh right, we aren't giving up before a ball has been kicked. That's good. The big question mark is we just have no idea how these lads are going to adapt. So last close season, for instance, we signed a Swedish goalkeeper in Leo Wallstadt, and we signed a lower tier German striker, Samir Tanalovic. And you know nothing about them. But obviously, you hope that they come in, they settle, they contribute quickly, and both of those players have left the club this summer. Wallstedt was an unmitigated disaster without play. He just wasn't ready for the physicality of the English game, struggled with crosses, made some absolute howlers, so we've got rid of him. Talalovic came on a substitute a few times, hit the post away at Hull, and that's as good as it got for him, so he's been offloaded. So we just don't know. These players that have come in seem to have a higher pedigree, but the English game is completely different. I think the Championship is an incredibly competitive division. I think that you could throw a blanket over a dozen sides and they could finish anywhere in a span of about 10 or 12 places. It really is difficult to call. For Rovers right now, I think getting a reasonably solid start and stopping the fans from panicking. If 3 games in, we've got gubbed 3 times, got knocked out the League Cup by Stockport County, say, then the natives will be restless. If we can nick a 1-0 win against you guys and nick a 1-0 win against Stockport in the League Cup, then all of a sudden, actually, maybe there's something here. So the jury's out, I think, is what we'd say. I think most Rovers fans think it's going to be a tough season. I probably have us in the bottom 5 as things stand. but obviously there's a lot of the window left. We'd only need a couple of injuries to some of our more experienced players to really make that team, that starting 11, look really very thin. So that's the nervous bit at the moment. But until the window closes, there's always a chance of doing something about that. We're very active in Premier League loans. We have been for a number of years. We have good links with Liverpool and Man City and Brighton in particular. So we're looking to see who might come in. And 2 or 3 good loan signings could make the difference between being 19th, 20th, 21st, and maybe 11th, 12th, and 13th. But for us this season, the starting gambit is don't get relegated. Please don't get relegated. Because obviously we were so close last season and the squad is weaker on paper until we see the likes of Ohashi and Gray actually play. We're not sure what we've bought. So,
I think I've got friends who aren't Derby or Blackburn Rovers fans, and they said that looks like a real 6-pointer on the opening day. And it is.
It's not what you want for your opening game, is it?
It's thrown up what could be a cagey affair with neither side wanting to let slip in the first game. Because I think we're similar in the fact of I think we need to get a couple of early results, whether that is a couple of draws, a win, a draw, and a loss. I would definitely take that because I think some of the months in our season, especially December, we've got Leeds twice, West Brom, Boxing Day. It's one of them months where you go, take a point at this point.
Where the win's coming from. I think everybody does that, don't they? When the fixture list comes out and thinking, how many points are we going to have after 5 or 6 games? And the first league table's taking shape. And that can frame your season. Under Thomason, we made the first season he was here, we made a cracking start. And it was kind of like, oh, hello. Yeah, I think we won 3 on the bounce, and it's this is excellent. And then we lost 3, and then we won 2, and then we lost 2, and it was one of what sort of team is this? But he won over the fans quite quickly. It was the way that we played in the games that we won. I say this season, we're just a massive unknown quantity. And anybody who tells you different is frankly lying. We have no idea what to expect on Friday, none whatsoever. If it all comes off, terrific. But obviously, we're bitten by last year's experience, and we're very cautious as a result.
I think with Derby, we're a known entity. We know that we're going to be down there. I think any fans who think we're going to be higher up are very optimistic, considering that. I think we're not a paper-thin squad, but I think with a couple of injuries, I don't think we've got that top-end championship quality all over the pitch. We've definitely got maybe 1 or 2 players who can provide that. But even then, if injuries come, then we're in trouble, I think, and we still need a couple of signings. So no doubt, I think on Friday we'll play like we have done for the previous 2 seasons, and it is very, very hard working, chase every ball, but also can come across a little bit negative at times. As in,
what do you guys think of Paul Warne? Because I have to say, when he was at Rotherham, I always thought he did a really, really good job. And there was talk when Mowbray left Rovers that he was someone that was very much on our radar. And I say I live in Sheffield. I'm quite close to Rotherham. You hear things and you see things. And it makes you sort of think, that's a very promising coach. But I understand he's not particularly popular. Is that right?
I think he sort of splits the fan base because he come into, for me, he's come in from Rotherham, and I know he was very highly rated by a lot of clubs. I think when he was at Rotherham because of the job he did, and he's come to Derby, and I think I'll happily say this. Listen, I've not seen Derby for 30, 40 years. I've watched 10 years now. I've had a season ticket home and away, and I have seen the worst football ever under Paul Warne, in my opinion. Okay. Last season we lost to Shrewsbury away, and that was probably the worst game of football I've ever watched Derby County put in.
But he got you up.
That's the thing with it. It gets you up. But then I think a lot of the questions have come. A lot of teams watched us last season and said, well, you weren't great, but you scored 1 goal and sat on it. And I was like, that's how you get promoted in League One. You score 1 or 2 goals and you grind out a win.
Yeah.
Whether we can do that in the Championship against, let's be real, there's some Premiership opposition in the Championship, isn't there?
There's some big names,
Yeah, you get teams...
Clubs who are resting on their former glories.
But you come up against it, and I think with Derby, it's, for me, I don't find the football enjoyable to watch. I don't mind that as long as the results come. But it does worry me that there was times last season when I think the start of the season we performed quite poorly. and the fans definitely weren't fond of Paul Warne and his style of play. Maybe that was due to the plays he had at his disposal. But I'd be interested to see whether, come the end of the season, is Paul Warne still the manager of Derby County? Because we're in for a tough season, put it that way. We're in for a tough season of being down there. We've got an owner who's got a lot of patience, so he probably will still be there. But for me, I've been treated some good football at Derby, would you say, under Lampard, McLaren, sort of the football that we played, well, donkeys years ago now, when you think about it.
Are you too young for the 11-point season?
I just missed out. I got a season ticket. No, I went to my first game, the year after, so I was 3 when it was the 11 points. So I hear all about it.
I'll let you into a little daylight in upon magic. I used to work for Derbyshire Building Society in Duffield, and for a subsidiary that was set up there. And at the time, Derbyshire Building Society was sponsoring the shirts. So part of the deal was that we could use the Sky TV box during the week for meetings. My boss was a massive Man United fan, loved football. Me, most of the management team were. So we used to say, we're always having our team meetings at Pride Park. Yeah. And so we used to go down. And of course, there was all this optimism at the beginning of the season. And then when you get there, you can almost see the grey cloud hanging over Pride Park. And we go in and everybody would be hung over. So just really, really down. And clearly there'll be loads of Derby County fans in the office, and they were embarrassed at the fact that they just couldn't eco. And I said, "Oh, don't worry, you haven't played us yet." And I said, I have a vague recollection that you took the lead against us. That might be wrong. It was a
might have, but yeah.
And then we came back to win 2-1 or something. And when you scored, I turned to my mates and said, I knew Rovers had given them the second win. I knew it. I bloody knew it. Yeah. And then I think David Bentley had a really good game, and we turned it around, thankfully. So it was Newcastle United, wasn't it?
The one
that season. Yeah, it was a very interesting season to observe Derby County fans. You'll get more than 11 points this season. After that, I'm absolutely sure.
Hopefully so. But yeah, on Paul Warne, I think he's very characterful in his interviews, which I think some fans like, some fans don't. It will always divide. I don't mind it. I think it's more interesting than having someone who doesn't give anything away.
Yeah,
it's a bit more personality in the game, isn't it? But
I think it's a safe pair of hands. I think, the grass is always greener. I think that's the danger. Is that you move the manager on, and then the new guy comes in, and he's actually not any better than the previous one. So, and then all the players fall out with him, and he wants to bring his own coaching staff in, and you lose his season easily, as well. We nearly did last season with Eustace. It's not easy to change a manager mid-season.
Yeah, I think the last thing on Paul Warne I'd say is that I think with Rotherham, he's always had a very different. Well, the Rotherham probably mentality is very different to the Derby County mentality. I think we've got a lot of fans who expect us to be sort of near the top end of the championship.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Derby County is a big club.
Yeah. And I think that expectation can weigh on your shoulders a little bit as a manager. It doesn't matter what's going on the field or what players you've got. You have it in your head. And I think also maybe the budget, I would probably estimate, is a little bit different at Derby. Rather than not being disrespectful, but
no. I mean, the crowns that you get compared to
clubs,
the sponsorship deals and the transfers that you've undertaken, you are different clubs entirely. But I always thought Warne did a really good job.
Yeah,
to go down and the club to stick with you and to bring them back up again. I always think that speaks volumes. A, that they were prepared to stick with them, and B, that the players responded and came back, because Rotherham are that ultimate yo-yo club, where they're just not quite good enough for the championship. But
so hopefully it works out this season with more resources, I would say. But then I think I've always been a fan of John Eustace as a manager. I mean, obviously he was a player with us at the back end of his career.
Yeah.
I think he moved on to coaching after us or around that. And I think there's potential there. Just depends on the resources, I think.
He strikes me as being very similar to Tony Mowbray. I think he's a safe pair of hands. The football that we've seen so far, solid but unspectacular, I think is how I describe it. But in fairness to him, again, the club are not providing him with the resources. So I think he's going to have to work a miracle to weld this squad into something formidable. He seems to have the respect of the players. I feel sorry for him. I think he's been given a tough gig. I think the vast majority of Rovers fans feel sorry for him. I don't think if things go wrong this season, we will point the finger at the owners before the manager, because they've with successive managers, they've just not done what they're supposed to do. And if they don't want to do it, well, sell us. But if you're not prepared to invest and you're not prepared to sell us, then we can't square that off. It's a very unusual situation at Rovers right now.
Yeah, it does sound a little bit difficult. But then talking about the manager, what can you expect on Friday night and then for the season in terms of, have you had a good indication of how you're going to play in terms of the formation?
Well, his favoured formation seems to be 4-2-3-1. So a couple of holding midfielders, which typically is Tronstad and Travis. That seems to have been the thing pre-season. And as I say, with the new lads coming in, it's going to be interesting to see who forms that three, because that's probably the one part of the pitch where we've got some options now. Wyman could come in as one of those wide players. We've got Guay and Ahashi. Ahashi strikes me as probably this is based on 45 minutes at the Stockport last Friday. He looks very industrious. He looks very mobile. So he could be the person that sits in that Sammy Szmodics role behind the central striker.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough to say, and that leads me on to probably my final question for you. What's your score prediction for Friday then?
I'll go with 1-0. 1-0. I think if we score more than one, that will be quite a surprise. He seems to be really, really drilling. So I would say the two centre backs, the two holding midfielders, that seems to be very much his philosophy. One of the fullbacks tucking in, sometimes to make it a back three with two holding midfielders in front. So I think his starting point is making us hard to beat, which I think is probably the right thing to do, because if you're not going to score that many goals, the goals that you do score, you don't want to be scoring 2 in a 4-2 defeat. I'd rather score 1 in a 1-0 win. So I'm not. I say my expectations are structured. I shall be keeping my fingers crossed. If you score first, I think I would be worried for us then, because I think the crowd might start to get a bit tetchy. If we score first, you would hope then that you get a bit worried and the reverse happens, and that we can perhaps pick you off on the counter, because I'm expecting that to be part of our game as well, where we are very, very compact but break quickly and try and score. So we shall see. It's going to be an interesting one for sure. But as you say, relegation 6-point first game of the season.
Yeah, I think that's what everybody's saying, the 6 points so early on. But I think there we go. I think I'll wrap it up there. If everybody has enjoyed listening, then please rate us 5 stars on whatever you listen on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you haven't enjoyed it, feel free not to rate it at all.
I can only apologise. Yes.
But yeah, it's been great to be joined by Ian from the 4,000 Holes podcast. So go and check out all their content there as well.